The brutal trick that makes your brain obey, Lotus Method. Most people think their minds are in their control, that they are the driver, and their brain is the obedient engine. But that illusion falls apart the moment you try to make a radical change. Have you ever tried to break a habit, start a new discipline, or simply command yourself to do what you know is right and found that something inside you resists, stalls, or sabotages the effort? That's not weakness. That's not laziness. That's the brutal truth. Your brain doesn't obey you, it obeys nature, pattern, and reward. And unless you understand how to break that ancient cycle, you will always be at the mercy of your own mind. What if I told you the key to mastering your brain is hidden in a flower, the lotus? It's not just a symbol of peace or spiritual awakening. It's a model for transformation. The lotus grows in mud. It pushes through the filth, through pressure, through darkness, and blooms in air and light. Not by accident, but by structure. You don't get the lotus unless you go through the mud. This is the core of the Lotus Method, and a psychological and philosophical tool that forces your brain to obey not by fighting it, but by tricking it. By giving your mind what it craves in a form that serves your deeper purpose.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Here's how the trap works. Your brain is obsessed with efficiency. It's not designed to make you happy, fulfilled, or wise. It's designed to conserve energy, reduce effort, and repeat whatever has been rewarded. So when you try to change, when you try to read every day, or wake up early, or stop doom scrolling, your brain interprets that as threat. Not intellectually, but biologically. It sees effort as a danger to stability. So it resists. And unless you override that resistance, you'll slide back into the same patterns again and again. The Lotus Method begins with a brutal acknowledgement. You don't control your brain by force, you control it by design. You must make the mud work for you. That means creating systems where doing the right thing feels easier than not doing it. You build rituals that start in chaos and climb into clarity. You begin where it's ugly and unmotivated, but you show up anyway. The trick is not to wait for motivation. The trick is to act before you're ready, and to link that action to something your brain already craves. Dopamine, identity, belonging, repetition. You don't fight the brain, you feed it intelligently. Let me ask you something that might sting. How many of your failures came not from lack of knowledge, but from lack of persistence? How many dreams have died not because they were impossible, but because you couldn't make yourself do what you already knew you should? That's the great human paradox, isn't it? We have infinite wisdom at our fingertips, yet we act like we're powerless. Why? Because knowledge doesn't drive behavior. Emotion does. And emotion is trained, not chosen. But that's what the Lotus Method exploits. It turns your daily mud, your resistance, your dread, your boredom into the very fuel that drives obedience. Now here's where it gets powerful. The Lotus Method begins with the smallest, ugliest, most forgettable action. Something so tiny your brain can't reject it. One push-up, one sentence, 1 minute of silence. But here's the twist. You repeat it at the same time, in the same place, with the same ritual. You make it sacred. Not flashy. Sacred. Over time, your brain starts to associate that moment with reward. All the mud becomes familiar. And you start to crave the bloom. Not because you forced motivation, but because you rewired the association. This is not self-help fluff. This is neuroscience wrapped in ancient philosophy. The lotus from the mud is the same as discipline from resistance. It's the same as wisdom from suffering. You don't wait for clarity to act. You act through the fog. And by doing that, you become the kind of person who acts. Identity is not something you find. It is something you install, moment by moment, ritual by ritual, mud by mud. And this is where most people fail. They think they need to fix themselves first before taking action. But the Lotus Method flips that. You don't fix yourself before you act. You act to become the person who doesn't need fixing. You fake the behavior until the brain accepts it. And eventually, the obedience becomes automatic. Not because you're stronger, but because you're smarter. So I ask you, what's your mud? What's the thing you keep avoiding because it feels heavy or pointless or painful? What would happen if you stopped trying to escape it and instead used it as the starting point? What if you built your entire transformation on the thing you hate the most? That's the brutal trick. You don't escape the mud, you use it. You don't beg your brain to obey. You trap it in a pattern that makes obedience inevitable. The hidden dopamine contract, how desire hijacks your mind, and how to rewrite it. Your brain doesn't speak in words, it speaks in chemistry. And the language it speaks most fluently is dopamine. This isn't just the chemical behind pleasure. It's the chemical behind pursuit, behind motivation, behind the sense that something is worth doing. Every time you scroll, eat, click, or chase something, dopamine is the invisible contract pulling you forward. But here's the terrifying part. Most of what you chase isn't chosen by you. It's chosen for you by algorithms, culture, convenience, and past experience. And unless you understand this contract, unless you learn how to rewrite it, your brain will never truly obey you. It will always obey the path of least resistance, the path of most stimulation, the path that leads to short-term excitement and long-term emptiness. Let's break it down. Dopamine doesn't reward you after you get what you want. It spikes beforehand in anticipation. That's why the idea of a goal often feels more exciting than achieving it. It's why someone can be addicted to the chase, but lose interest the moment they get what they were chasing. Your brain is wired to seek novelty, not satisfaction. And this is why superficial goals, like money or attention or validation, often leave you feeling hollow. You got the thing, but the feeling didn't last. Why? Because dopamine isn't about having. It's about craving. And if you don't take control of what your brain craves, you'll always be a servant to whatever is loudest, brightest, and most immediate. The Lotus Method forces you to confront this. It makes you ask, what am I actually rewarding in my life? Am I rewarding distraction? Procrastination? Comfort? Complaining? Every repeated action is a vote not just for who you are, but for what your brain believes is valuable. And here's the trick. Your brain doesn't care if the reward is good or bad, meaningful or meaningless. It just cares that it felt something, and that it got a hit. This is why people stay in toxic cycles, not because they enjoy them, but because their brain has been trained to associate those patterns with stimulation, and stimulation is mistaken for meaning. So how do you rewrite the contract? How do you make your brain crave discipline the way it craves sugar or social media? You do it by hacking the loop. You shrink the reward window. You make the process feel more rewarding than the outcome. That means building rituals where the act of showing up becomes its own payoff. You don't wait to feel like doing it. You do it in the same place, at the same time, with the same pre-action cue, so your brain starts to associate that setup with dopamine. Over time, the ritual becomes the reward. The mud becomes meaningful. The struggle becomes sacred. Let me give you a real-world example. Imagine someone trying to build a daily writing habit. The average person tries to brute force it, sit down and write 1,000 words every day. But their brain isn't wired for that yet. It resists. It stalls. So what happens? They fail. They feel guilty. And guilt becomes associated with the act of writing. Now the brain doesn't just resist the effort, it resists even thinking about writing, and the cycle collapses. But the Lotus Method would take a different approach. It would start with a one-sentence ritual, but done at the same time, in the same place. No pressure, no outcome, just the act. Then, over time, the brain learns, when I sit here, I write. And when I write, I feel good. The dopamine loop is rewritten. The brain begins to crave the ritual, not resist it. This is how monks meditate for hours, how athletes train relentlessly, how artists create without waiting for inspiration. It's not willpower, it's wiring, and that wiring is something you install, one loop at a time. So I ask you, what loops are running your life right now? What habits are silently shaping your identity, not because you want them, but because you've rehearsed them? What rewards have you taught your brain to chase without realizing the cost? This is the hidden contract. Every habit is a negotiation. Every action is a signal. And your brain is always listening, always adapting. The good news, you can renegotiate. You can take the same dopamine system that once betrayed you and make it obey. But only if you stop chasing the high. Only if you start rewarding the ritual, not the result. The Lotus Method doesn't care about how you feel. It doesn't wait for inspiration. It builds obedience through design. It takes the mud of craving and sculpts it into something elegant, focused, and unfailing. It's not glamorous, it's not exciting, but it's real. And it works if you're willing to do the brutal work of rewiring your reward system. The identity engine, why you become what you rehearse, and how to rewrite your role. There's a moment in every person's life where they look in the mirror, not just physically, but existentially, and ask, who am I really? And too often, the answer doesn't come from your soul. It comes from your habits, from your past, from the things you've done so many times that they've started to define you. The truth is, identity is not a single revelation, it's a series of rehearsals. You don't become who you are by accident. You become who you are by what you repeat. The Lotus Method is built on this foundational truth. Your identity is a script, and you are the actor. But the terrifying part, most of us didn't write the script, we just inherited it. From our parents, our failures, our environment, our fears, and we've been acting out the same role ever since. Your brain doesn't distinguish between action and identity, and it assumes that if you keep doing something, it must be who you are. This is why someone who procrastinates a few times starts calling themselves lazy, but why someone who fails a few times starts believing they're not good enough. You perform the behavior, and the brain builds the story. And once that story sticks, it becomes the lens through which you see every opportunity, every challenge, every part of your life. it becomes the prison. But here's the philosophical breakthrough: identity is not fixed. It is fluid. And because it's built on repetition, it can be reprogrammed. You don't have to believe in yourself to act differently, you just have to act differently long enough for belief to catch up. The Lotus Method doesn't ask you to feel like a disciplined person. It asks you to behave like one, over and over, especially when it's boring, especially when you don't want to. Because every repetition is a vote for who you want to become. And the more votes you cast, the more inevitable the transformation becomes. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. How many parts of your identity are just roles you've rehearsed out of habit? Would you still think of yourself as bad at relationships, or not a morning person, or undisciplined if you hadn't said those things to yourself 100 times? If you hadn't acted them out so often that they became familiar? The brain craves consistency. It wants your actions to match your self-image. But if that self-image is based on fear, failure, or the past, it will fight any behavior that contradicts it. This is why it feels so hard to change, not because you're incapable, but because your old identity is trying to protect itself. It's afraid of death, and every time you act outside of it, it panics. It whispers, "That's not who you are. Stop pretending." But pretending is exactly how you become someone new. The Lotus Method doesn't require you to feel authentic. It requires you to rehearse a better role, to script out the character you want to become, and then to live as if it were already true. Not once, not twice, but daily, ritual by ritual, until the brain can no longer tell the difference between the actor and the act. And here's the key: you don't change identity by setting massive goals. You change it by winning small, consistent, boring victories. You wake up early not to prove anything to anyone, but to tell your brain, "This is who we are now." You write one page, eat one clean meal, say one kind word, not because it's impressive, but because it's aligned with the role, with the script, with the person you are rehearsing into existence. We think identity is something we find. It's not. It's something we forge. And every day you're forging something, whether consciously or not. So the question isn't who am I? The question is, who am I becoming through repetition? What roles are you rehearsing when no one's watching? What character are you playing when you think no one's keeping score? Because the brain is keeping score. And it obeys the script you repeat the most. From mud to mechanism, the final transformation that makes obedience your default. There comes a point, if you've practiced the Lotus Method long enough, where the battle quiets, where the resistance loses its edge, where the actions that once felt foreign, forced, even painful, begin to feel normal. This is the final transformation, the shift from deliberate effort to automatic execution, from mud to mechanism. But you've pushed through the sludge of inconsistency, rewired your dopamine contracts, rehearsed your new identity, and now, without even realizing it, you've made obedience your default. It's no longer a struggle to do the right thing. It's harder not to. This is what most people never reach, because they give up in the mud. They think the discomfort is a sign of failure, when in truth, it's the signal that transformation is happening. The mud is the forge. It's the medium through which raw behavior becomes refined identity. But the key is to stay in it long enough, consistently enough for the brain to fold the new behavior into its operating system. Once that happens, the need for motivation disappears, and the need for willpower fades. The behavior becomes mechanism, And that's when things start to get magical. You wake up and meditate without a second thought. You write before checking your phone. You go to the gym not because you have to, but because not going would feel off. You no longer ask yourself, should I? You simply do. This is the awakening of true discipline, not as a grind, but as a groove. The system has taken root. The lotus has bloomed. And here's the catch. This didn't happen by accident. It happened because you designed it. You built the cues. You built the rituals. You made the mud meaningful. And by doing so, you created a mechanism that protects you from your own worst impulses. But let's be clear, this is not perfection. This is not some robotic state of flawless performance. You'll still have off days. You'll still feel resistance. But the difference now is that the system catches you. The same way a river returns to its path after a small detour, your momentum pulls you forward. You no longer have to fight every day to stay on track, because the track is who you are now. The brain has been conditioned. The identity has been shaped. The dopamine loop has been redirected. And obedience, true, deep, sustainable obedience, is no longer a battle. It's a baseline. Let me ask you something almost sacred. What would it mean for your life if doing the hard thing became your default? What would be possible if the discipline you've always admired in others wasn't some unreachable trait, but simply a system you've installed? How much energy would you free up if you didn't have to argue with yourself every morning, every task, every decision? That's the final gift of the Lotus Method. Not just behavior change, not even identity change, but freedom. Freedom from the mental noise, freedom from internal sabotage, freedom from the exhausting loop of wanting to change, trying to change, and always falling short. The mud never goes away completely. Life will always give you new chaos, new discomfort, new darkness. But now you know how to use it. Now you see it for what it is, raw material, a signal, a starting point. You don't run from it, you start from it. You welcome it, because you built something stronger than motivation, but you've built a mechanism. And the beautiful irony, the moment your brain truly obeys you fully, quietly, instinctively, you stop needing to control it. The system leads. You follow. The mud rises. And the lotus blooms. Not because you forced it, because you designed it.